Join us on Patreon and become part of our journey to uncover history's untold stories. Your support helps us create in-depth content, bring hidden narratives to life, and keep history alive for everyone.
Long before the cathedrals, the Renaissance paintings, and the golden crosses that define modern Christianity, the Bible was a living document in the hands of desert dwellers, shepherds, scribes, and prophets, most of them dark-skinned, Semitic, or African. The early world of the Bible was not carved out of marble, but out of sand, stone, and fire, rising from the ancient Near East and North Africa. And yet, somehow, when we picture Jesus, Moses, or even King David today, the images that flood the mind are often pale-skinned, blue-eyed, and European. How did this transformation occur? Why does a sacred text born out of Africa and Asia look, sound, and feel so distinctly Roman and Western? The answer lies in centuries of imperial manipulation, cultural conquest, and a deliberate erasure, the whitewashing of the Bible by Rome to remove the presence and legacy of the Black Hebrews. To understand the erasure, one must begin with the root. The Bible did not emerge from Rome or Greece, but from the lands we now call Israel, Palestine, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iraq, and Sudan. These were Afro-Asiatic regions, populated by dark-skinned peoples who spoke Semitic and Cushitic languages. Ancient Hebrew itself is a Semitic tongue, linguistically and culturally closer to Ethiopian Guizi and Arabic than to Latin or Greek. The patriarchs of the Bible, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, live as nomads in a region heavily intertwined with Africa, especially Egypt, which plays a central role in biblical narratives. Moses was raised in the Egyptian court. Joseph became a high official in Egypt, and it was to Egypt that Mary and Joseph fled with the infant Jesus to escape Herod's wrath. This intimate connection to Africa is foundational, yet modern Christianity, shaped heavily by Rome, treats it as a side note. When the Roman Empire conquered Jerusalem in 70 AD, it not only destroyed the Second Temple, but scattered thousands of Hebrews across Africa, Arabia, and southern Europe. Many fled into Egypt and deeper into regions like Nubia and Ethiopia. Historical and rabbinic sources confirm these migrations, including the writings of the Jewish historian Flavius Josephus, who noted how Jews fled Roman terror and found refuge in African territories. But as Rome expanded its political control over the Mediterranean world, it also sought to control its religious narratives. The Roman Empire did not simply crush rebellions. It assimilated cultures, absorbed gods, and redrew the faces of its subjects. The early followers of Jesus were Hebrews who observed the Torah, kept Sabbath, and prayed in Aramaic and Hebrew. The original church in Jerusalem was Jewish to the core. But after Rome destroyed Jerusalem, the center of Christian theology began shifting westward, particularly to Antioch, Alexandria, and later Rome itself. Over time, the Hebrew identity of the faith was suppressed. When Emperor Constantine legalized Christianity in the 4th century and made it the empire's official religion, he had no interest in preserving its Semitic or African roots. Constantine convened the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, not just to establish orthodoxy, but to streamline theology into a Roman worldview. Roman theologians and artists began recasting biblical figures in their own image. Jesus became a pale-skinned man with flowing brown hair and soft features, though Isaiah 53 described the Messiah as having no form or comeliness, no beauty that we should desire him. Early Ethiopian and Coptic images of Jesus depicted him with dark skin, Afro-textured hair, and Eastern garments, in sharp contrast to the later European renderings. These African Christian communities, the Copts of Egypt and the Ethiopians of Aksum, maintained their ancient images and customs long after Rome had rebranded the faith. But the whitewashing was not limited to iconography. It was embedded in doctrine and scripture itself. When Jerome translated the Hebrew Bible into Latin, the Vulgate, he did so under Roman patronage. This translation became the standard Bible for centuries across Europe. And while Jerome was a scholar, his work reflected the theological priorities of Rome, which included minimizing Hebrew influence and promoting Greco-Roman interpretations. By rendering Hebrew concepts through Latin, many cultural nuances were lost or sanitized. The removal of the Black Hebrews from biblical consciousness was also aided by selective canonization. Texts that portrayed Africa and Africans in prominent spiritual roles were either excluded from the canon or de-emphasized. The Book of Enoch, revered in Ethiopian Christianity and referencing angels descending on Mount Hermon near modern-day Lebanon and Syria, was excluded from the Western Bible. In Enoch and other apocryphal books, figures like the Nephilim, Watchers, and fallen angels interacted with humans in stories that bore cultural echoes from African and Semitic traditions. The Roman Church deemed these too dangerous or heretical. Moreover, Rome was deeply uncomfortable with the theological independence of African Christians. In North Africa, theologians like Tertullian, Origen, and Augustine were leading intellectuals of early Christianity. They wrote in Latin and Greek but emerged from African soil. While Augustine's ideas were preserved, his African heritage was downplayed. Tertullian, who coined the term Trinity, was labeled heretical in later years. The powerful presence of Black Christian leadership in Africa posed a contradiction to Rome's vision of a white European church. By the time of the Renaissance, artists like Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci were reshaping biblical imagery in the style of European nobility. The Sistine Chapel painted an entire theology in the image of Rome. Moses had an Italian nose, David a Roman jawline, and Mary the complexion of a Venetian queen. The African presence, so obvious in the original context, had been bleached from memory. The Hebrews who had fled into Africa after 70 AD were forgotten. Their descendants, who maintained Hebraic traditions across West and Central Africa, were later branded as pagans or primitives by European colonizers. In fact, when European explorers and missionaries encountered African communities practicing circumcision, dietary laws, and Sabbath observance, they often failed to recognize them as Hebraic. The Lemba of Zimbabwe, the Igbo of Nigeria, and the Beta Israel of Ethiopia all claim descent from ancient Israelites. Genetic and anthropological studies have since confirmed the presence of Semitic markers amongst some of these groups. But centuries of European theology had so effectively disconnected Judaism from Africa that such claims were met with skepticism or outright denial. Colonialism completed what Rome began. European powers used the Romanized Bible as a tool of subjugation, presenting the faith as inherently white and European. Missionary schools taught African children about a blonde-haired Jesus while discouraging any knowledge of their own biblical roots. Slavery, too, was justified using a whitewashed Bible, one that ignored the African context of the Exodus and turned the children of Israel into abstract symbols rather than historical people who once walked the earth in skin as dark as the soil of Cush. And yet, the memory persists. In Ethiopia, the Ark of the Covenant is still venerated. In the hills of Ghana and Nigeria, oral histories speak of ancestors who followed Moses' laws. In the Caribbean and the Americas, descendants of enslaved Africans have revived Hebraic traditions long buried by colonial erasure. The Black Hebrew Israelites, often misunderstood and maligned, are part of this long, painful, but unbroken chain. Rome may have whitewashed the Bible, but it could not destroy the truth beneath the paint. That truth lives in dusty scrolls preserved in Ethiopian monasteries, in the faded manuscripts of Timbuktu, in the chants of Coptic monks, and in the hearts of those who remember that before there was Rome, there was Zion, and Zion was black.